After the Australian Grand Prix, I don't think the irony is lost on anyone that, whilst Carlos Sainz, the driver that Ferrari have dropped for next season, was winning the Grand Prix, his replacement Lewis Hamilton was breaking down after having one of the worst weekends I have ever seen him have. Despite the fact that Sainz has missed a third of the races so far, he is statistically having the best start to a season in his career, with 2 podiums, 1 win, and 40 points on the board. Lewis, on the other hand, by his own admission, is having the worst start he has ever had, and even adjusting for the different point system in 2009, with a DNF, a 7th, and a 9th, this is also statistically his worst start in his career. When the Hamilton to Ferrari move was announced, I said at the time that whilst I don't think it's the most shocking move in Formula 1 history because there were genuine reasons to want to make that switch, I did say that it was the biggest move in F1 history in terms of him being a 7-time world champion, in terms of it being Ferrari, and also just the unbelievable reaction to the move by fans and the media that I have never seen before in my life. All of that meant that, coupled with the fact that it was announced a whole year in advance, meant that there was always going to be a huge amount of attention and scrutiny this season on Lewis, on Mercedes, on Carlos, and on Ferrari to see who made the right choice, who made the wrong choice, and who looked best placed going into next season. That scrutiny on both the drivers and both of the teams is only going to continue as the season goes on, but apart from the fact that Ferrari are still not title contenders, they have clearly made a positive step forward compared to last year, with Sainz also having a very strong start, whilst with Mercedes, not only does the car look even less competitive relative to the field than it's ever been in the ground effect era, but Lewis is also struggling with the car and in his own performances. Given the circumstances, Carlos Sainz executed the perfect race. I have never had a major surgery, so I'm not even going to try to pretend to understand what it's like to be in his position and race in his condition. But just based off the performance itself, he outqualified Leclerc, which I think in itself is always impressive, and that put him in the best position possible to take advantage of any bad luck for the drivers ahead of him. Once Max dropped out, Carlos's experience and composure did the rest. He looked after his tyres extremely well, extending his opening stint, and even when the likes of Norris and Leclerc tried to push him, he always had enough pace and enough tyres in hand to stay out of pressure. Although Leclerc tried to apply a little bit of pressure towards the end, he respected the team orders to just bring home the 1-2. And now, whilst this result was great to see, especially as a non-Red Bull win has been pretty rare over the past 3 seasons, as always when it comes to Carlos Sainz, when he gets a win or has a run of 2 or 3 good results, the conversation always seems to get back to that somehow he is an underrated driver. Now, just to make sure that I wasn't being a hypocrite about this, I went back to my driver rankings that I did at the end of last season, and I put Sainz in the exact same tier as the likes of Leclerc, Norris, and Russell. Now, to me, that is not me underrating him, and so I think this narrative from the mainstream media that people somehow don't know how good he really is, I just don't think that's really true. The fact is, the reason why Carlos Sainz is rated so highly is because throughout his career he has had very good teammates in pretty much every single team he's been, and he has consistently been very competitive against every single one of them. That is also true of his time against Leclerc. However, he also isn't quite as good as Leclerc over the course of a full season, and that is something that I'm going to be referring to a lot in this video in terms of judging drivers over a full season. It's one thing to have a good race or to have a purple patch during the year, but in reality, the championship standings at the end of the season is all that really matters. Even this season, in Bahrain, Leclerc outqualified Carlos and then had brake issues in the race. In Jeddah, when Carlos was out, Leclerc got the absolute maximum result behind the 2 Red Bulls, and in Australia, Carlos simply had the better weekend overall, with Charles still bringing it home in the next best possible position, bagging valuable points and a second successive podium. Now, it might sound like I'm having a go at Carlos Sainz, but I'm really not. It's more so that the narrative around him that's being peddled by the mainstream media just really frustrates me. I would never say that he is an underrated driver, but I think I would agree with the fact that maybe his skill set and what he brings to the team is sometimes underappreciated. Everyone that's ever worked with him always talks about how he's a very methodical and very analytical driver. He also has a very experienced and mature head on his shoulders that, along with his consistent performances, also brings a calming effect on the team environment. Even though he is extremely competitive like every Formula 1 driver, and I'm sure absolutely hates to lose to Leclerc, throughout every single team that he's ever been at, he has never been accused of being an unstabilizing force within the team. In fact, he is quite the opposite. With that in mind, there's no doubt that Ferrari choosing not to re-sign him was extremely harsh given his performances relative to Leclerc, and given the positive environment that he's been able to create at Ferrari with Charles. But I think not only is it too early to say that Ferrari have made a mistake, because in reality we won't find out until 25 or even 26, but I think it's just worth reminding people that Ferrari made their decision before the season even began, off the back of what we saw in 2023. Last year, when you take into account performance across the whole season and reliability, I think Mercedes and Ferrari actually had fairly equal cars. They were podium contenders from the start of the year all the way to the end, and even had one or two races where they could have won Grand Prix, with Ferrari being the only team to seize their opportunity in Singapore. Having said that, Lewis Hamilton dominated George Russell, finishing as best of the rest in the championship behind the two Red Bulls, whilst Sainz, despite winning that Grand Prix and having a pretty strong season, still finished behind Leclerc, who in turn still finished behind Hamilton. Sainz was extremely unlucky to lose his drive because, in my opinion, there's only 3 drivers that I think Ferrari would actually have over him. One of them is in the other car right now in Leclerc, the other is driving the best car on the grid in Verstappen, and the third is a 7-time champion who we know that they've been chasing since 2019. Other than that, even though Alonso is a better driver, I don't think that they're taking him because Fernando could unsettle the environment, and I don't think that they're taking the likes of Norris, Russell or Piastri because, as good as those drivers are, I just don't think that they're that much of an upgrade over Sainz that Ferrari even needs them. Sainz lost his seat to the only driver on the grid who made any sense for Ferrari and in their eyes was seen as a justifiable upgrade, and the fact that it was a 7-time champion I think is almost a compliment to how good Carlos Sainz is. And now, in terms of his future, I'm not going to talk about that in this video because a few weeks ago I made a dedicated video discussing where I think he should go, and to me this win doesn't really change anything that I thought or said in that video, so if you want to know the teams that I think he should go to, definitely check that video out after you've watched this one if you haven't already, via the link in the description. The last part to this puzzle, however, is Lewis Hamilton, who is in a really strange situation. When you really analyze all of last year and the points contributed from both of the drivers, even with the disqualification in Austin taking away a second place, Lewis was pretty much the sole reason that Mercedes finished ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship, with Russell by his own admission having a really bad season. Given the context, it makes the start of this season really awkward because whilst Mercedes have somehow fallen even further back in 24, on the other hand, Lewis must be looking at his future prospects with a lot of positivity and maybe even some vindication that he definitely did make the right choice for 25. Whilst Russell has had a stronger start than Hamilton and looked more comfortable with the car, I think that it would be naive to think that he's also not frustrated and struggling in his own way. So far the gap between the two teammates has been just under 2/10 in qualifying, but when you look at their combined finishing positions, it's been 5th, 6th, 7th and 9th. That is really embarrassing. These are the same two drivers that finished 2nd in the Constructors' Championship only last year. So I refuse to believe that over the winter, they've somehow forgotten how to drive. Watching on board with Hamilton, you can see that he's having to work the wheel a lot during the corners, which indicates instability, and it seems to change a lot from session to session. The team has admitted that on Lewis's side of the garage, they are back to experimenting a lot with setup on the Friday because they just don't have the car in a consistent window. In Australia, after a promising FP3 session with Lewis 4th, he wasn't able to go faster in qualifying, and even George only set a time a 10th quicker than what Lewis did in FP3, despite the track rubbering in. The reliability issue for Lewis in Australia was just the cherry on top in what has been his worst start to a Formula 1 season. There is still, of course, a long way to go, and I do think Mercedes will get a little bit closer to McLaren and Ferrari because, at the moment, they are a glorified midfield team fighting for the lower reaches of the points with Aston Martin. But Mercedes improving is anything but a certainty, and it makes for this awkward situation where, despite Lewis on a performance level warranting that Ferrari seat over Sainz based off last year, Mercedes, due to their own underperformance, are now making people question if Ferrari made a mistake. There's no doubt that Lewis, with the disappointment of the car and the mentality of going into the season of wanting to finish on a high with Mercedes, is now struggling for motivation. How he's going to stay motivated the entire season with Mercedes hitting a brand new low for the team is going to be his biggest challenge, especially when he sees that his future team is on such an upward trajectory. And now, of course, Lewis himself has also got to take responsibility for his poor results, because as one of the best drivers on the grid, when your teammate is beating you, it means that you're not getting the most out of the car. But there's no doubt that if Ferrari with Sainz keep challenging for podiums and wins, and if Mercedes keep dragging Hamilton and Russell down with them, despite the fact that on paper Hamilton is an upgrade on Sainz, that pressure of if Ferrari made a mistake or not is only going to get bigger and bigger as the season goes on. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.